Hello, welcome to this third episode of the Science Toolbox. And we're going to talk about now that you have your speech developed for your research project, how to make it more appealing, more interesting, give it a different shape or two. There's a theory called metaphoria created by Lindsay and Saltman in Harvard. And this theory particularly developed around 7 metaphors that people are relatable to. This is used in social media, in public relations, in advertising, and it's very effective because it talks about things that are relatable across cultures. So these metaphors are ways in how you can unpack a story to tell a specific message. So let's review these theories. The balance is a cover of everything that means harmony and equilibrium, things about adjustment, the maintenance and offsetting of forces, and examples that cover physical. For example, could be how you can manage your personal biases. If, for example, you have to talk about a specific political ideology you are not aligned with, in a way that's balanced but also shows and argues your point about a different a specific political movement or idea. The balance of healthy nutrition, how you can create a balanced meal, the work-life balance that people need in their life, and also tolerance, for example, of different points of view.
Which is better for your brain when it comes to taking notes and learning? You're asking the right girl, because I'm Rachel, the neuroscientist. There are studies that demonstrate greater recall after learning from paper or taking notes on paper versus screens. However, those findings are often misinterpreted or misunderstood or just misrepresented. While there may be subtle differences in actual information processing, screens versus paper, or the simple having a topography of a physical object, there may be subtle differences in how your brain engages with that. But the most impactful variable at play here is almost never talked about, and that is time. Writing, reading, gathering information is much faster when you're using a digital device versus paper, books, etc. When it comes to human learning, time is arguably our greatest limitation. Your brain's sketchpad, working memory, the step before short-term memory and certainly before long-term memory, can only hold so many items at once. If you rush the process or load it with too many items too quickly, they won't make it. They won't make the cut. So whether you're note-taking, learning, reading, choose what you prefer. Screen or paper is fine.
This particular metaphor refers to keeping things out of becoming so why containing behaviors or containing specific material things can be useful. So combined, for example, in the last example of Rachel, she's telling how to contain your online balance activities to take notes and keep yourself active as a critical thinker, but also your digital habits. So another example could be the following: how the Nobel Peace Prize social media is talking about poor and rich countries and their difference, and is categorizing them in different ways.
The research awarded the 2024 Economic Sciences Prize has shown that it largely depends on the country's social institutions, such as the governance and the laws they have and how they have been created. The research explores prosperity in places colonized by Europeans. The places that were rich when they were colonized have today become much poorer, while the places that were poor when they were colonized have higher prosperity. This development depends to a large extent on the social institutions that the colonizers introduced. The richest 20% of the world's countries are about 30 times richer than the poorest 20% of countries today. But that can be changed for the better, because the research shows that it is possible to increase prosperity in poor countries by adopting a more democratic system.
Then we have another metaphor, which is the transformation. The transformation involves a changing of a state, of turning into something different or somebody different, or for example, as a child turns into a teenager turns into an adult turns into an elder. So for example, transformation can be both positive as an experiment, but also negative as changing into a difficult political regime. But also in nature, how the seasons change and nature changes, or also climate change, how has been changed in different ways. So a good example would be how water experiments have been done in space for NASA and change in different specific fields, or the following one that we're gonna observe. Then we have also the metaphor of the journey. So the journey talks about a trip, right? Moving from one place to the other. It could be predictable, but also unpredictable. And it goes as the saying says, like time flies. It can be uphill, downhill, and talks about displacements in times and space. So if you're a historian, for example, you can talk about how a specific practice changed the way history was in the industry. So the journey might take any time, any place. That means that you're moving from one space to the other. I'm talking about personal experiences. It could be also how you evolve from one state to the other. What's your journey in grad school to professional fields, or also in specifics of research, how food has changed across time, right? So anything that's historically set in a chronological order, but also how things could be seen in different ways.
So let's talk about how I got my dissertation research IRB approved. If you don't know what an IRB is, it stands for Institutional Review Board. And basically any institution that does human subjects research, so research with humans, has an IRB. And it's a board that basically makes sure that what we're doing is safe and ethical. For my dissertation, I'm doing research on preschoolers and their moms, so obviously they're human, and I had to get that approved. I will say I had personally a very easy approval process. I submitted it and it was approved pretty much a week or two later. It was very, very quick, but I do think that is because I put a lot of time into my application up front. So I fully knew every single measure that was going in my study before I applied for my IRB. I knew the breakdowns, I knew all of the citations, and I described every single aspect of the study in length when I applied for my IRB the first time, so that they had more than enough information needed. In my initial application, I also included all of my recruitment materials, all of my testing prompts. I included all of the text messages and emails that I will send to participants or to potential participants. Since that initial application, I have filed 3 amendments. Amendments are basically if you want to add something to your study or you want to change your protocol a little bit, you have to get that looked at and get that approved too. I still have had a pretty quick turnaround with those amendments, though I really haven't had too many troubles with my IRB. So I'm gonna knock on wood and hopefully not jinx myself if I need to submit any other amendments, but I will say that when it comes to doing an IRB, it is a lot of work, but if you do that work up front and you really are detailed and you really take time to describe everything in like painstaking detail, it's going to work out for you in the long run. You're probably going to get approved, and you're probably going to get that in a quicker timeline than if they have to come back and ask you for additional.
Now, connection. Connection is a metaphor that's deeply ingrained in another universal metaphors of connecting and belonging across people. So for example, when people feels that they belong to a community, feels that they are identified with each other, it could be the paradigms of friendship or family, social networks, or also the disconnections that this can happen in different ways. So for example, if you want to talk about discrimination and disconnection. So there's this great example that I'm going to post here about how a researcher that reported to NPR made a piece about cancer ghosting. What happens to the victims of cancer that are sometimes most likely to die, but actually their social networks kind of like assume they're gonna die, even they survive, and they end up alone. The resource is a metaphor that talks about how to solve issues or what to do. And this is a very powerful metaphor for science communication. Why? Because most likely sometimes science is communicated out of data in one way of communication, however, leaves audiences disempowered or sad or hopeless. And we don't want that. If you want to enter a dialogical paradigm with your research in the community, you have to also give them something they can do. Everybody is worried about climate change and fires in these days. What they can do with their daily behaviors to overcome those issues. If they are most likely, for example, to have a specific issues by wearing a specific type of shoes, such as example we're gonna see from Dr. Ishibashi here in TikTok. She recommends how to avoid long-time issues in your feet by choosing the right shoe. What's the characteristic of the right shoe? So resources are key in the work we researchers do. Steps, tips, things to look at, red flags, green flags of good behaviors. It doesn't have to be all negative. It could be also reinforcing positive behaviors in people. So think about yourself as a magazine of all the news that could be valuable from what you know as a resource to the community you are reaching out with your research.
Let's talk about shoes for wide feet. I think that when people typically talk about like wide feet shoes, they talk about like sneakers such as Ultra, trail running shoes, or like the Hoka Gabiotas. So all of those kind of wide sneakers are wide in the forefoot, but narrow or like normal throughout the rest of the shoe. But there are certain brands that are great for like fashion wide width shoes. Sam Edelman is a really great kind of like mid-tier trendy designer that has a whole section of shoes for wide width. Vionic is another brand that is sold at a lot of like walking shoe stores. They sell them at Nordstrom, and they have really good insole, wide width. The styles are not as like trendy as like a fashion brand such as Sam Edelman, because they kind of meet in the middle between like comfort and fashion. Actually, if you just go on Nordstrom.com, you can filter by wide width, and they have so many different designers that have wide width available. Now, for the more designer brands, Ferragamo, Prada, and Roger Vivier are really great for wider feet. These Ferragamos are on sale. You know, the things that I look for, especially in like a heel or a loafer dress shoe, is you want really, really soft leather. So like a calf leather, so that it can stretch out a little bit more than something really stiff. And not all leather is made equally. Here is an example of the Roger Viviers. They're a little bit wider than some of the other like higher designer brands, especially if you compare it to like Saint Laurent. Chanel sometimes actually has a little bit of a wider forefoot area too. But really it comes down to like the shape of the shoe as well as the leather quality, which can really help.
So control doesn't really mean only power and authority. It also can mean some degree of control and empowerment to the audience. So you want people to feel that they can face difficulties, that they are not powerless, that social norms do not dictate their behavior, and they won't lose control of every single thing they have. So for example, if they're having a meltdown or throwing a tantrum or blowing a stack of money, what they can do. If they are identifying situations of difficulty, how they can control the situations and make a plan for themselves. For example, this one that we're gonna put here, how bullying can be controlled by the children themselves. We tend to think about young audiences or children or people with disabilities as helpless beings, which is not true. However, also, we need to provide vulnerable and marginalized communities these resources so they can advocate for themselves. What you can do in case of an emergency, what you can do to control your disease, your chronic illness, what are the recommendations of database research, how you can have more sustainable, balanced foods that are also part of your life.
If it happens in class and everyday life, and understand why it's wrong. Bullying can have a lifetime of harmful effects on kids and adults. It is deliberate behavior that is done to hurt or upset someone over an ongoing period of time. Bullying can happen anywhere that there are people, such as at school. It can be done by an individual or a group of people, and it is also hurtful in lots of different ways. What are the different types of bullying? Physical and verbal bullying are two forms of bullying that are easy to identify. Physical bullying involves hurting someone's body or the things that belong to that person. This includes hitting, scratching, throwing objects at someone, or destroying someone else's belongings. Verbal bullying includes saying mean and unkind things about another person. This includes teasing or taunting, name-calling, saying inappropriate things about someone, or threatening to hurt someone. There's also a kind of bullying which is less obvious. Social bullying is a form of indirect bullying that involves leaving a person out of a group on purpose, telling others to leave a person out or not to be friends with them, gossiping or spreading rumors, and standing by and watching bullying happen. Last but not least, there's also a form of bullying known as cyberbullying, which is through the use of the internet, social media, cell phones, or other electronic devices. It can include mean or inappropriate text messages, name-calling or spreading rumors on social media, or making threats online. What can you do to prevent bullying? It's sometimes hard to stop bullying for fear of becoming a target of bullying yourself, fear that you'll get in trouble, fear of physical injuries, or fear that a friend would get in trouble. However, if you are a target of bullying, remember that no one deserves to be bullied. Know that.
So, these are the metaphors that you can choose. Think about it in a creative way, how you are gonna unpack the story to your audience. Think about their age, think about what they like to do on their free time, think about the social media or the best outlets to reach them. Not everybody is on social media all the time. Also, our next episodes, we're gonna think about public engagement, because a key aspect of science communication is connecting face to face, even if it's like live or even if it's in person, and how you can also make the community part of these engagement activities, and how you can see different situations in a way that helps others solve their issues, but get better informed about sometimes topics that are taboos, topics that there's not much information about, that probably are lying in your papers or in your lectures in the school, but how your students can be part of it if you're a faculty member. If you're a grad student, how you can do a club, a project for it. So I hope this is helpful. Look into the examples that we're providing here. Shout out to these wonderful researchers and media outlets that are doing the difference. And I hope you enjoy this episode.